Hi everyone, this is Julianne Victoria of Through the Peacock's Eyes. Welcome to my channel. So this is part 2 of my pregnancy, labor, and healing experience. And I'm going to put the same warning out there with this video as I did with part 1. If you are in your first pregnancy, if you want to have children and you're a little stressed out about how labor is going to go, or you're pregnant, you've had kids before, but you tend to take on other people's challenging experiences and start to think that yours will be that way, or you don't like blood, turn off this video. This is not for you. So the warning is out there at any time. Of course, you can turn it off. You're not forced to watch this at all. This is for all the people who have asked me to share my experience, and for those who, how did I phrase in the first video, who are of a tougher constitution, women of a tougher constitution, and you want some maybe insight on how to handle any challenges you might have in your pregnancy or labor, you can keep watching. Hopefully, and it's highly unlikely, your labor will be anything like mine. It was a very traumatic and difficult one. So hopefully no one out there watching this will have an experience anywhere near like I had. So again, this is part 2. Part 1, I discussed my pregnancy, the major details, not every little detail, that would take hours. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my labor. I don't know if I'll get through the whole thing because it was a very long one. But let's get going. Okay, so my pregnancy went to 41.5 weeks. It was getting down to the line. Had I gone a couple more days, my doctor would have wanted to induce. But it started out, so active labor started out with my water breaking. It was a Monday evening around 7 p.m. And it was just a little trickle. And I'm like, I'm leaking. I was like, it's not my bladder. Okay, I'm pretty sure my water broke. But I was expecting, if my water were to break, that it would be a big gush of water, because I had been monitored so regularly, twice a week, in the last 2 months-ish or so of my pregnancy. I knew, because they measured the volume of amniotic fluid, that I had quite a lot. I had plenty. My doctor even joked that, hey, can I spare some and give it to some other woman who had very little? So it was, I was expecting if my water broke, it would be just this big flood happening, but it was just this little trickle. I was like, okay, well, off to the hospital we went. And I'm going to backtrack right now before I get into the rest of this part of labor, because this was our third trip to the hospital, ready to go into labor. So before my water breaking, I had 6 weeks of what's called prodromal labor, non-stop, 6 weeks of contractions. They weren't like, okay, camera shut off again. It's been doing that regularly, so hopefully it hangs in there for me. So as I was saying, it wasn't just Braxton Hicks, a few contractions here and there. I had consistent contractions for 6 weeks. They just weren't close enough and regular enough usually. So in late July, late July? Yeah, the end of July. So about 6 weeks before I actually gave birth to my baby, I was having a lot of contractions. And at my last doctor's visit that week, my doctor said, if they are 10 minutes apart and 1 minute long, go in. So I was at, that would have been like 35-ish weeks along. A little early. You want to at least get to like 37, 38 weeks for the baby's development. So she said, if they're that consistent, 10 minutes apart, go in to the maternity unit. So we did. Contractions were going. I was there for a while, monitor. I was not dilated. there for quite a few hours, and then it stopped. And that's what would happen. I'd have contractions, and then it would just quiet down a little bit. They wouldn't, totally stop, but they would spread out. So we went home. About 2 weeks after that, when I was about 38 weeks long, 37 and a half, I think. Yeah. I had a doctor's appointment, a monitoring appointment, where they check the amniotic fluid, they check the baby's heart rate, they do some graphs, make sure everything's looking good. My husband and I decided to go for a little walk on the beach and go get some brunch afterwards. And during the walk on the beach, the contractions were getting really strong. And they were close together. They were like 5 minutes apart, maybe even less. I wasn't so there totally with the watch, but we did have an app on our phones to, track the contractions. So, because we're like, all right, let's just make sure it's going to keep happening and we don't get sent home again. We went to brunch and they kept going. So we're like, okay, we need to go to the hospital now. So we went back to the hospital. And at this point we had our hospital bags with us just because so much was going on. We go in and they're like, oh, wow, you're in labor. They put up all the monitors and and I still wasn't dilating. And after 2 hours of that, it stopped, or, it slowed down so much. It was like, well, it stopped. And because I was 37, 38 weeks, they're like, well, okay, go home. So I want to say there was a third one of those, but I can't exactly remember now. So yeah, we had 2, maybe 3 trips to the maternity ward, or the birthing unit. I forget what they call it now, before I actually went into labor. But for 6 weeks, until my water broke, I was having a lot of contractions. I was watching, I was monitoring. There was a third time, I remember it now, because I was lying on the couch, and this time, I forget when it was now, but I remember I was lying on the couch and I had my app on my phone and I was tracking the contractions, and it's like, go to the hospital. They were, I think this time it had to be less than 5 minutes apart and lasting at least a minute long. So there was a third trip. So 3 trips to the hospital, prepared to be giving birth to a baby, and then it would stop. I wouldn't be dilating and it would stop. And it was early enough along that it's like, okay, go home and wait a little longer. Okay. So then comes, when my water broke, 41 and a half weeks. And so it broke around 7 p.m. in the evening on a Monday evening. And we go to the hospital. We're like, well, this is it, because I'm at 41 and a half weeks. My water broke. Okay, we're not going to be sent home when your water breaks. And we go in, they hook things up. Yes, having lots of contractions. And I should say, like, this six weeks of contractions, I would feel them. They were strong, but I wasn't like screaming in pain. But when I'd go to the hospital, those 3 false alarm visits, or alarm visits, and then the labor would stop because they weren't really false, right? I'd be like, the monitors that they put on you, like my numbers would be so high. They're like, they couldn't believe I wasn't screaming in pain. And I would say I have a very high pain tolerance, because one of the doctors, the doctor who ended up doing the emergency C-section, who was the doctor during my actual labor, he just couldn't believe I was just like kind of sitting there breathing through the contractions and not just falling apart in pain. So I know I have a very high pain tolerance, and this experience, and you'll understand as I go through it, this experience kind of showed me how much pain I can tolerate. Okay. So back to actual labor. We're at the hospital, monitored, contractions getting stronger and stronger. Again, I was like half a centimeter dilated. Went through the night, contractions getting stronger. But at this point, they're really hurting. And I had said I'd prefer to have a natural childbirth, so no epidural. Part knowing I could take a lot of pain, and one, epidurals kind of scare me because there is a chance you can become paralyzed by them. Small chance, but it has always kind of scared me. So I would have preferred, if I had everything ideal, to just, natural childbirth. So by the morning, and I hadn't slept at all, I still wasn't, I think I maybe hit a centimeter dilated. And, this is going on 12 hours since the water breaking. So they had to induce me anyway to get me to dilate. So they stick a drug inside of you to stimulate dilation. And for those who are squeamish, you might not want to hear this part, but every time they had to check me for dilation, the 3 previous visits to the maternity ward, and they would check several times because they had to see if stuff was happening, those hours I was at the hospital, it felt like they were sticking a red hot poker inside of me. That was like the most painful part up to this point. I don't know why. One nurse seemed to have experienced that before, but all the other nurses just were a little confused by it. My doctor seemed to have experienced that before too. So I think it's just nerve endings were hypersensitive. So still wasn't dilating, so they had to put drugs inside me to induce dilation. Throughout that day, so Tuesday, contractions getting worse, more painful. I'm just doing all the breathing, trying to stay as relaxed as possible. Still hadn't slept at all. I was able to eat some. And at this point, I'm not testing blood sugar now. I'm just like eating just, to sustain myself, to give me energy for labor, not worrying about that because that gestational diabetes is done once your placenta is released. And so the day of labor, I'm just, it's like, don't worry about that. Drinking lots of water, doing what I can, walking up and down the corridors a little bit, sitting on the bouncy ball. The pain, though, is getting really bad. By Tuesday afternoon, possibly late morning, the contractions were getting longer than the spaces in between, which I had not read about, heard about. It doesn't usually happen. They were huge contractions, seemed like 5-minute long contractions. And I'm pretty sure, because I remember looking at the clock, and then I'd get a break, which was very short, sometimes only 30 seconds, and then another contraction. That in itself, so though the nurses change shifts, right? So the nurse I had at that point right then, she comes in to check the monitors, and at the nurse's station outside the room, they're watching everything too. And my nurse at that time comes in and she's like, we need to give you something to give you a break. She's like, what you're doing is not humanly possible. And I'm like, okay, then I guess basically it's like, okay, I have really high pain tolerance. But it scared her so much, she found someone to replace her on the shift. So I scared a nurse away with my labor. But the doctor came in, I think, or talked to the nurses and decided to give me some fentanyl in my IV drip. Oh, I should also add, I had constant IV drips because I tested positive for strep type B, I think. Every woman gets tested in the US for that. And everyone tends to get it, comes and goes. But if you test positive close to labor, they give you antibiotics in the IV so you don't pass it on to the child. because if the child gets it, if the baby gets it, they can get meningitis. So it's something you want to have those antibiotics going to protect the baby. So I had nonstop IV drips this entire time in the hospital since my water broke, and they replace it. I think it was every 4 hours or every 4 hours. So I had regular IV drip going through. So they added the fentanyl to the IV drip, and they're like, oh, you might feel kind of loopy and help with the pain. I would say it took the edge off. I didn't feel loopy at all, but I wasn't in so much pain with those extremely long contractions with no break. I could slow down the contractions, and I had a little more space in between. So it did help some. By this point too, by Tuesday afternoon, I started shaking. Like I was like shaking like this from this point into the next day. They said it was the hormones. I think it might have been a little bit more. I think my body might have been, I don't know, slightly in shock, struggling for strength. But I had to hold on to the side things on the hospital bed. Like they were shaking because I was shaking. And I had to hold on to them to sort of release some stress so I could keep the rest of me relaxed to work with the contractions. I had to contract my hands, and if I could do that, I could keep the rest of me relaxed. So at this point, I'm also shaking nonstop. The fentanyl they gave me in the IV drip took some of the edge off for a little bit. And then the contractions got really long, really bad, with what at this point felt like a few seconds in between. It's really bad. At some point, Tuesday afternoon, evening, they determined I had a 4-sac. So it's a second sac of water at the bottom, so under the baby's head, because her head wasn't descending. And I did start dilating at this point because of the drugs they put in me. Excuse me. And the dilation was getting bigger, more and more. Of course, every time, again, they checked that because they have to go in you and check your dilation. It was like a red hot poker inside of me, and that was just more pain. So with the 4-sac, and this is why when my water broke, it wasn't like a flood. It was like a top sac that broke and leaked, but there was another sac. So the doctor came in and he had to break that other water sac. And so squeamish people, don't listen, turn off. They take kind of I heard it looks like a knitting needle, and they put that in and puncture the sac. And this is what some people do actually to trigger labor. And of course, that again was like red hot poker inside of me. I could feel the needle going in. I didn't feel the puncture. I was just holding onto that bed and just screaming. I'm sure I scared all the other women in labor in this maternity ward, which happened to be jam-packed that day. It was a full moon, and they say they're busier, but it was like jam-packed maternity ward or birthing area, whatever they called it. I'm sure I scared them all, but they're probably like, oh, we're not as bad as that woman over there. And my husband said, because he was there the whole time with me, when they broke that, it was like a flood of blood and water, or bloody water, just poured out of me. But I knew, we knew there was a lot of amniotic fluid, but there's a lot of blood in it as well. And I remember in front of me, up on the ceiling, was the TV in the room. And had I wanted to, it basically worked as a mirror. I could have seen everything they were doing, but I closed my eyes. And from this point, I probably had my eyes closed most of the rest of the labor. One, because I was exhausted, still hadn't slept at all. Although in those few seconds between contractions, I would sometimes drift, but I would pull myself right back contraction would start. I'd have to pull myself back because you'll have to watch the first video because of the tarot cards that would come up. So if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I'm a spiritual life coach and counselor. I use tarot and astrology, so you'll have to watch the first video. I'll link it on screen here towards the end. So yeah, Tuesday afternoon, evening was really long, really painful. There were tubs in each maternity room, and before they had to break the water sac, I tried the tub to see if that helped. Of course, the bouncy, like, you know, everything. But again, the contractions were so unusually long, the breaks so unusually short, the pain just stronger, worse and worse and worse and worse every hour that went on. Of course, I'm shaking like crazy. Like, I can't even like make myself shake like I was. I couldn't believe how much I was shaking. After the 4-sac break, they wanted to give me another dose of fentanyl, and they did. Nothing happened. It didn't take any edge off. It didn't work at all. At this point, we talked to the doctor, and we put in the order for an epidural, because we're around 24 hours now. So it's about 7-8 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday. And I think at that point I was fully dilated. So 10 centimeters, they want you to be dilated. And yeah, they put in the order for the epidural. We had to wait for the anesthesiologist because of course he's on routes doing stuff, wait for the order, had to go through insurance really quick to come through, because originally I said I wanted natural labor, so they didn't prep, you know, an epidural yet. We didn't know it was going to be so bad. 2.5 hours later, 10 p.m. on Tuesday night, the anesthesiologist comes in. At this point, it's like contraction is nonstop. There's no break, really. And those 2 hours before the epidural, I'm just reminding myself of the strength card. I'm just like, you have the strength. I just kept reminding myself, you have the strength. And I would think, oh God, please get here soon. I don't know if I'm going to survive any more of these contractions. I really could feel like there's not much left in me. And he probably came just in time, because between shaking and trying to hang in there, I didn't know if I could go any longer. If this was 100 years ago, I would not have made it. Neither would the baby. So the anesthesiologist comes in, and I have to sit up, and I'm shaking like crazy. I don't even know if I can move. Somehow I get up and I grab onto the sides, of the, the bed. And I'm just like trying as hard to hold still. Because again, there's my fear of like, oh my gosh, you can be paralyzed, if they hit the spinal cord, because the needle's going so close to your spinal cord. The anesthesiologist was amazing. He was so quick. Got it in. They're like, okay, might be, a few minutes before you feel it. I felt it, like the relief right away. Yeah, that anesthesiologist was amazing. He worked so quickly, so precisely. Like, he saved my life. He really did. Honestly, if he was like 15 minutes later, I don't know if I would have made it 15 more minutes. The pain was gone. I'm still shaking. I can still feel that there are contractions going on, but I'm not in pain, and I am completely wiped out. So it's 10 p.m. lying there. They want me to start pushing because I'm fully dilated at this point. Epidural's in. I start pushing, and pushing. I don't know how long. but just to let you know, it's another 6 hours. Um, okay, they give me a break. And then they start coming in and having me turn because the baby's heart rate is going up and down like crazy. She's stressed. And I think part is I have no fluid. There's no cushion for her in there. So they have me lie on my left side. And then they come in and have me lie on my right. And I'm shaking like crazy. I can barely turn myself. I have to grab so hard. I mean, they're helping me, but and I can't feel my lower body. And I was so numb. I could feel myself getting number, if that even makes sense. I actually asked them to like turn down the epidural, which they did. I didn't know if that was possible, but like they turned it down a little bit because I was like, I'm getting number and number. And that was scaring me. So they kept flipping me, mixed in with trying to push. The doctor came in and, he's like, okay, I'm going to use the forceps, not to like pull on her, but to help guide her out because she's just not coming out. We tried that 2 or 3 times. So it's like 6 hours of flipping, push, giving me a break, flip me around, push. So 6 hours since the epidural. At 4 a.m., and I think they had already been prepping. They're like, okay, we need to, it's not working. She's not going to fit through. And my husband said you could actually see like the top of her head. So it's just her head wasn't going to fit. She had a perfectly average sized head. My bone structure, there wasn't enough room. I also don't think I released any relaxin hormone throughout my pregnancy because I never felt wobbly or unbalanced, or my joints never felt loose. And that's part of like the hormones out of whack. And I think hormones out of whack, I didn't release the hormones to dilate at all. I think there are 2 or 3 that you need. So hormones out of whack, imbalance, again, watch the first video, contributed to all this stuff. So 4 a.m. approximately, moved off to the surgery room. I'm splayed out. I swear I felt like I splayed out on the cross. I had so many needles in my arms and hands, and they're just pumping more and more stuff into me. I'm splayed out. They put up this blue wall so you can't see anything. And the surgery went great. Emergency C-section. I should mention, so you could see the top of baby's head. You can't just go into surgery. They had to push her back into my uterus in order to do the surgery. So I basically went through labor, put her back in, off to surgery. Since I think it was 28 weeks on, baby was head down. Perfect, right? As they cut me open, she turns breech. She turns around and wants to run away. I think she didn't want to come out. She was being stubborn. So they had to get in and get her out. She was all turned and twisting up. But surgery went pretty smooth. There was one point, all of a sudden I was getting really nauseous. And I said to the nurse, I had my eyes closed the whole time, but I could hear everything going on. Still hadn't slept at all. I said, I'm really, really nauseous. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I can't start heaving. I was like, I don't think I have anything in my stomach anyway, and they sprayed something under my tongue and it instantly went away. And I was like, where was this when I got car sick as a kid? So surgery went smooth. Baby came out perfectly healthy. And as they pulled her out, I could hear all the nurses say, oh, she's so cute. So just proud mother thing there. And of course, because baby was stressed, they had to take her away. So my husband was able to go with her, but I wasn't able to see her or touch her. They sewed me up. And I do believe when you have a C-section or an emergency C-section that they do actually kind of pull your uterus out. And if there's organs in the way, sometimes they pull them out. So of course I didn't see anything that went on, but I know the putting me back together and sewing me up took much longer than getting the baby out. Which I guess, you want to make sure they put you back together properly. Excuse me. So, yeah, that was labor. I think I'm going to stop this video here if that doesn't scare anyone away from having children. Again, my husband went off with baby. They then moved me to a different bed to move me off into a recovery area. And I think it was about an hour after she was born, I finally was able to see her. They brought her in. I think I might have slept a little bit in that waiting time. I'm not so sure, because I could hear things, but I was definitely like delirious. And when they brought her in, they put her on your chest, on your skin, you try to breastfeed. I don't know if anything happened. This is another story that's definitely related to the hormone things, which I'll get into the next video. But that was my, I think, 33-hour labor plus 6 weeks. And I want to add those 6 weeks in because I think my body, with all those contractions, fairly regular, nearly nonstop for those 6 weeks, just not close enough or as often enough as you need, except for those 3 times we went to the hospital. I think my body was saying, she'll fit now. Let's try to get her out. But my hormones weren't responsive. I wouldn't dilate, and in part it was a little too soon the first couple of times. But I think my body was trying to give birth because she would have fit. So that's my labor. I hope this doesn't scare anyone. Again, if it had, I gave you a warning ahead of time. And I did the whole time. I basically was like, I have the strength. I have the strength. I just thought of the strength card. I have the strength. Apparently I have superhuman strength. So much so I scared a nurse away. But yeah, this is part 2. Part 3, I'll go into, the struggle to breastfeed, which I think will help a lot of women. Some of the recovery, and then there might be a part 4, maybe part 5 of my healing since then. So yeah, I'll stop this here. Thank you for watching this far, this long. I hope you weren't eating during this. And share it with anyone who you think it might help, but don't share it if you think it's going to scare anyone. Yeah, thank you for liking, not liking, subscribing, and I'll see you back here soon.